Okay. Like she said, my name is Jennifer Phillips, and I work in Cincinnati at the EB Center. I have been there about 7 years, and I'm really excited today to talk about something different than what, as dietitians, we typically talk about. We typically talk about supplements and vitamins, so this is kind of a, I think, up-and-coming, kind of trendy, new thing that's kind of, it's not really new to us, but kind of new, I think, to the EB population, and more families are starting to do blenderized diets. I know I've talked to a couple families in here already the last day and a half, and they are currently doing this diet, so it's real exciting. I do want to start out by saying that this is merely an option or an alternative to conventional tube feedings. By conventional tube feedings, I mean like Nutrin or Pediasure, those kind of formulas. I don't want you to think, as I explain this diet, it's not for every family, it's not for every child, and that if this isn't for you, that you're, doing a disservice to your child if you're not doing a blenderized diet. Okay. So what does this involve? Just like the title says, we use blended foods and liquids that are given as a bolus into a G-tube. A lot of times I've gotten a couple emails recently about, can I put this on a pump, and so on. So really the goal of this diet is to kind of mimic how we eat day to day. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, and so forth. So why homemade formulas? So one of the biggest things I think is that parents can feel more connected. They're able to offer love through food. I think a big part of being a parent is being able to feed your child and make food choices for your child. Emotional support. I think a lot of times when we have to go down the G-tube route, families kind of feel sometimes not sad but disappointed a little bit, maybe that they have failed as a parent to give proper nutrition to their family, or maybe the kid feels like they have failed. I think this is a way to give power back to the family to make choices about what food they're giving them. And then again, parents have more natural choices, and kids can help with food preparation. A lot of the kids will help decide what they want to eat that day in their G-tube. Meal times. Again, meal times are a very important part of being a family. You can have multiple people who provide the G-tube feeding: parents, siblings, grandparents, relatives, and friends. And socialization. A big part of who we are is eating, right? We go to dinner with family and friends. Christmas, Thanksgiving, I had a mom who emailed me and said, it was so awesome. Finally, my kid, this was a child who doesn't eat anything by mouth. They can't. They have aspiration issues. They had Thanksgiving turkey dinner with their family, and that was huge for her. Some reported benefits: improvement in reflux symptoms. A thicker formula or food will tend to sit in your stomach. Unlike thin formula, a lot of how we feed our EB kids, because of school, bandage changes, and time constraints, we feed overnight. Natural feeding, right, we don't lie down and eat. We're up, we're moving, we're sitting up. So a lot of times families will complain about in the morning, I know they're laughing over here because it's one of my buddies, you'll have vomiting in the morning, right? You've laid on your back all night, gotten a tube feed, you sit up and you may have some vomiting. Improved digestion is another big one. Improved oral intake. A lot of times kids will complain about the formula in their stomach. When they burp it up, it's gross, it tastes nasty. When they burp up real food, it tastes pretty okay. I know it sounds gross, but you know what I'm saying. Improved wound healing. I just had a mom today tell me, look at my daughter's skin, she looks better than I've ever seen her, so that's really great to hear too. And bowel movements, you're getting a lot of natural fiber, so I've heard a lot of positive feedback about being able to cut down on like Miralax doses and things like that, because you're getting, like I said, a lot of natural good fiber. And they just felt better and showed more interest in activities and learning. So who typically benefits? A lot of times patients who are very volume sensitive and that they don't tolerate, large bolus feeds, so sometimes it's hard to fit all of our nighttime feeds in if we have rate issues about how high we can go up on our rate. So if we're trying to bolus during the day with that thin liquid formula, a lot of times the kids will have some vomiting issues. Patients with food allergies, and families, like I said before, who just are going to prefer to give whole, not real foods. Like, we do a great job, right, in medicine and science, making things in labs, but Nutrin, Peptamen, any kind of formula cannot compare to, food that we're growing on the earth. So making the decision. So making the decision to do this can be a big one. It can be time consuming, it can have cost constraints, so resources. You're gonna need a good blender. So what I'm gonna to say that, no, I'm not getting paid by Vitamix. I'm gonna say that blender over and over and over again, but it is the best one out there. Also, a good blender is called a Ninja. And I will say that there are insurance companies that will give you a discount if you show the need for medical necessity. Williams-Sonoma, we actually have one in Cincinnati at our mall. They will give you a $100 discount if you have a medical letter of necessity for this. Vitamix also will provide refurbished blenders for you for a lower cost, because like I said, a high new Vitamix blender can cost you between $450 and $550 for a new one, which is a lot of money. But like I said, they'll sell you one maybe about $250, $350. That's a used one that they fixed up and still works fantastic. Again, cost. So typically, we've had some problem with insurance companies sometimes over the years, will cover traditional formula if it's going to a G tube. So Nutrinol, that they usually won't fight you. They'll provide that for you through your insurance. Food, however, is not going to be covered. Now, most moms will say to me, I'd be feeding my child anyway, right? So what's the big deal? And then time. It's going to be a lot more time consuming than just hooking your pump up, opening a can, and dumping. So there are many options when doing this diet. One of the first ones is using commercial formula still with a small amount of baby food. Typically, the kids that will start with this are maybe a child that just turned age 1, and we'll introduce food slowly, just like you would if you were a baby. We'd start with a baby fruit or baby infant meat. Another option is 3 meals a day of blended food with commercial formula at night. So you may get, sometimes too, when the kids are going to school, they don't want to be fed at school, so maybe you do a meal at breakfast, maybe nothing at lunch, they'll eat at lunch if they do eat, and then come home, get a snack and maybe dinner, and then we'll still do an overnight feed. Another option is just taking what the family eats. A lot of times, you have other kids in your family. For breakfast, you may make eggs, toast, sausage, and milk, and you may feed that. Your child may attempt to eat whatever they can by mouth. Don't let them sit there for an hour. Throw the rest in the blender and put it in the tube. And then also a complete diet of blenderized foods. So there are families that we have completely eliminated the need for overnight feeds, and they just do, like I said, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks of blended food. And there are many other options in between as well. So designing the diet, I would really recommend that you get some, initial help in the beginning, just making sure that you're getting all the nutrients and vitamins that you need. There are a lot of dietitians now out there that will do this diet. It used to be, initially when I got a couple phone calls, they wanted their local dietitian to help them, and they were uncomfortable doing it, maybe just an EB population, but like I said, this is really a growing thing across the country. We have a clinic in Cincinnati that sees patients, which is called pureed by G-Tube, which is similar to this diet, that sees over 300 kids a year. We're gonna look at height, weight, and BMI like we normally do, and we're gonna look at our current intake and tolerance. If we're having vomiting issues now, how do we transition to this diet? If it's a child who's not used to eating much by mouth and not used to having a lot of food in their stomach, we're gonna need to go a lot slower than a child who's eating a little bit more. And also our current medical status, what's going on currently, what are our wounds like, what in general is going on. So some general rules and guidelines. Typically, I would prefer not to do this diet on a child under the age of 1. I just think you need to get through the breast milk and formula stage first, and then over 1. A lot of times, too, our G-tube size is not where it needs to be. We really would like a 14 French to do this diet to make sure that we're not going to clog the tube. And again, we're going to monitor closely protein, fat, and carbohydrates and fluid in the diet. I will say, with monitoring these combinations of food, we really want to mimic how we would eat. So we want our carbohydrates to be, 50 to 60%, our fat to be, 20 to 30%, and our protein to be 10 to 15. In EB population, it can be a little higher. And I think sometimes I've had families who've called me and said, my child's not tolerating, and they're focusing on one little thing. So for example, fiber. I think my kid's biggest problem right now is constipation. So they take every fiber-containing food there is known to man and throw it in a blender. Well, their kid is miserable, right? Fat also, once you start hitting 40 to 50 to 60% of your calories from fat, you can see a lot of intolerance. So we really need to make sure we're maintaining a balance. So once I sit down and start doing this, kind of how we go about it is step 1, I'm gonna figure out my protein, okay? So my protein source. Usually We're gonna start with liquid. So liquid protein will help with mixing a formula and the formula consistency. So usually it can be milk or even like the formula that you're on now. And usually when we start this diet, we will use, if you're already on G-tube feeds, that is the base to build upon. And then I'm gonna choose another thicker protein such as meat or yogurt. You can do this diet vegan, you can do it dairy-free. Again, you're gonna need probably a little bit more help, but it is doable. And then again, like I said, very important to remember that people with EB typically have higher protein needs, right? So we need to really make sure that that is adequate. Milk and milk substitutes. So whole cow's milk, soy milk. A lot of families, the big rave right now is almond and rice milk. We do need to watch these, however, because those two milks typically tend to be lower in protein. Things like coconut milk and Greek yogurt is a great one. So then we're gonna look at our meat and bean group, things like stage 2 infant meats. If you don't have the time to blenderize meats, a great option is using baby food meats. They're already a fantastic texture that's very easy to push. They come in 2.5 ounce ready to feed jars. It's really, if you're on the run or on the move, it's a great option. Or you can cook your meats at home yourself and puree them. Chicken, beef, turkey, eggs, a lot of people do tofu. And then if you have a good blender like a Vitamix, you're able to blend whole nuts and things like nut butters. Again, formulas can reduce the need for a lot of volume initially, and especially if you're somebody who burns a lot of calories. And then, like I said, what I'll typically do is overnight feeds to start as we get built up on this diet. And there's just some examples of a lot of the formulas that you may be on already. So after I figure out my protein source, I'm gonna look at my carbohydrates, right? And typically this is gonna come from fruits, vegetables, grains, pastas. And again, you're able to use some stage 2 infant baby foods if you need to on the go. The infant dry cereals are great. They make organic. You can buy whatever you need of fruits and veggies too. They're already blended, like I said, into a good texture and easy to use. So our carbohydrate sources: wheat, oatmeal, rice, barley, couscous. Quinoa is a great one if you have a good blender. You just have to watch because it's kind of got that hard shell, but it's high in protein. And then fruits and vegetables. Again, formulas are great, but you can't mimic the antioxidants you can get from real food. And fiber, right? So apples, bananas, blueberries, down the line, any of those. Prunes are a nice one to add, you know, if we're having problems with constipation. Again, not going overboard, but just like babies, a little prunes never hurt anyone. Vegetables, peas, spinach, kale, on the line. Pumpkin's a great one. A lot of times you can buy canned pumpkin. Again, already in a great smooth texture to be able to bolus. So I've got my protein, my carbohydrates, and then I'm gonna move to my fat, and I'm gonna pick, you know, healthy fats. Olive oil, canola oil, nut butters, avocado is a fantastic one. I have some families who right now typically just do commercial formula feedings, but they'll give their child an avocado a day for healthy fat and have reported improvement with skin and wound healing. Omega-3, so flax seed, meal oil. Flax seeds you need to watch. You need a good blender again to be able to do that so you're not clogging your tube. Things like walnuts, pumpkin, tuna, salmon, all of these amazing foods that have so much healing properties. So we've got our protein, our carbohydrate, and our fat, and then the big thing is fluid. I think fluid in general sometimes in EB gets overlooked, and I think it's probably a lot of the reason, besides our gastric motility issues, that we see a lot of constipation. So I'm gonna check my free water. I'm gonna make sure that the child's receiving enough fluid. So most blended diets are about 70% free water. So I'm gonna come up with a fluid goal. I'm gonna see how much I'm getting from my meal or my foods, and then I'm gonna give you a fluid goal either by mouth or what to put into the tube. And then administering the diet. How do we start doing this? We're gonna start off very slow, like I said, at maybe a fourth of our goal. So if our goal is to get 8 ounces at 3 times a day, we're gonna start around 2 ounces at a time. We may do this every 2 to 3 hours. And what we typically do is we'll cut the nighttime drip feed by about 25% when we're starting this diet during the day. And we're gonna use a 60 ml syringe to bolus feed. And we're gonna do slow, tiny pushes. I think a lot of times families wanna stick it in there, just slam it in. You're gonna get sick. We all should be eating. It should take us all at least 10 to 15 minutes to eat, most of us, right? And then we're gonna flush with water to make sure that we're not gonna clog that tube. And again, some big kids will tolerate 10, 12 ounces of food followed by 8 ounces of water and be fine. Typically with our kids, I see we tend to do more of the water between meals instead of with meals. And again, and we always say, if you want to warm the food before you're giving it so it's not ice cold going into the belly, you put it in a warm water bath. Do not, it's like an infant baby bottle. I had one mom tell me, oh, I put it in the microwave. I'm like, oh no, like it's gonna heat unevenly and you might be pushing some really hot food through there. We're gonna monitor growth. It's imperative to make sure that what we're providing is adequate. So we're gonna look at weight, we're gonna look at BMI, we're gonna look at how we're doing. Vitamins. So vitamins are a big thing. A lot of times when you're doing a blenderized diet, you probably, depending on the variety that you're doing, may eliminate your need for a complete multivitamin, but most of the time we'll leave one in the background just to make sure we're covering our bases. We're still gonna look at our EB panels where we look at iron, vitamin D, selenium, carnitine, and zinc, and we're gonna supplement those as needed. I've had a couple kids too where their iron requirements and other vitamin requirements have significantly decreased by getting more whole natural foods. I think the biggest thing about this diet too that I really want to harp on is the food safety aspect of this. You really need to be careful when you're doing this diet that you're following food safety protocols like you would even preparing a meal for yourself or your family. So you really need to be clean. There are families that we've had, not in EB and outside, where the parents have wanted to do this and we've been worried about food sanitation in the house. So like I said, you've really got to be careful. Clean hands, work surfaces, hand washing, which you should be doing even when you're doing a normal tube feed overnight or whenever. Following clean instructions for the blender, washing those syringe with hot soapy water. Separate, so I had a mom say, oh, I was chopping chicken and then I threw this and chopped on my other cutting board, so no raw chicken, then followed by vegetables, common sense things. Cooking, we typically would recommend using a food thermometer to make sure that all of your meats are cooked thoroughly. Again, most foods are at 165 degrees are pretty good. Chill and freeze. Keeping food safe keeps it cold, right? So what I typically recommend is not leaving food more than 24 hours in the refrigerator. I know you may say, well, I leave leftovers in the fridge for a week and still eat them. But again, we just want to be safe. Prompt refrigeration of perishable food, so don't make up a bunch of chicken and leave it on the counter for hours. And then homemade batches should again be used immediately, chilled or frozen. And a real nice way to store this kind of food is a lot of people use like mini muffin can or cups or like ice trays that give you a nice serving size, and they'll freeze in there, pop them out, put them in plastic baggies, label, and it's a good way to minimize space in your freezer as well. So again, equipment that you're gonna need, a blender. Again, a Vitamix is really recommended if you're gonna use things like meats and nuts because it's gonna eliminate the need to use a lot of fluid. There are people who use like magic bullets, baby bullets, the little hand blenders, but you're typically gonna need a lot more fluid to get that to be the consistency you need, so your volume is going to increase. So having a really good blender eliminates the need for that. If you don't have a blender like a Vitamix, you may need to strain, so things like cheesecloths are good. If you have chunks or seeds, to make sure, again, that you're not gonna clog your tube. And again, you're gonna need storage containers. Some helpful hints for some of you that are already doing this diet. Grains can be tricky to freeze and thaw and to put through the tube. Potatoes are something that just do not freeze well. Rice works better fresh, and it's better to freeze things individually. So if you have blueberries and you freeze them, and chicken, you freeze that alone and then mix them together at the final time instead of blending it all, freezing it, thawing it, and then trying to push it. And then milk or formula, again, should always be added at the time of presentation, not in the initial big batch, which is then frozen. Strategies. A lot of people, I think, find it easier initially, oh, I'm gonna make these big batches and freeze them, when really they find out in the end that making a single day's worth of formula tends to work best for them. And then consider making 2 different recipe meals. I had a mom call me and said, he's just not tolerating, but she was mixing all kinds of different random foods together that myself would never eat, milk and orange juice and I don't even know what it was, random things. And she found out if she did breakfast like cereal, fruit, and yogurt, which is what you would typically, be familiar with in your stomach, he did a lot better than mixing all kinds of different things. And then, her lunch dinner base was more like meats, veggies, cereals, dairy oils, and fruits. So a general way to do it is what I have is a blended diet worksheet. So this is an example of like a 1,400 calorie diet. We have them for 16, 2,000, 3,000, whatever you may need, and it really gives a little bit more option. It's more a serving size based. That way you're not looking at the back of a label and counting every single calorie to make sure you're getting where you need to be. So for example, like grains, you would do 5 1-ounce servings, which I have a bunch of instruction on what is a 1-ounce serving. Vegetables, 1.5 cups, fruit, 1.5 cups, milk or milk substitute, 2 cups, 4 1-ounce servings of meat, beans, and nuts, and then 4 teaspoons of yogurt will roughly get you 1,400 calories. An example of a day recipe may look like a cup of brown rice cooked, a half a cup of quinoa cooked, a cup of sweet potatoes, a half a cup of spinach, raspberries, applesauce. We'll use a base of our formula, Boost Kids Essentials, a half a cup of Greek yogurt, some chicken breast, and some coconut oil. That's gonna give me 1,500 calories, and it's gonna give me my proportions where I need them to be. And I have this amazing fancy program at work that I'm able to put in, if you would send me, this is what I'm giving, I can put it in this program, and it's gonna tell me here my calories, my protein, my proportions of things, and it's also gonna let me know vitamin-wise, where am I? Do I need additional vitamins? Again, this is easier to do if someone's doing a set daily recipe every day. We know that, for an example, a 2-year-old, one day they eat, one day they don't, but over a week's time, we're usually gonna get what we need in, so things may vary day to day, but this is a nice little program I have that can really kind of hone in on what we could be, deficient in. And if you need a good reference book, there is a spiral book called Homemade Blended Formula Handbook by these 2 wonderful ladies. It is the most fantastic book. It is so user-friendly. It guides you through everything, food sanitation, blending, like I said, some tips and things. It is really an amazing book that you can find on Amazon. And thank you.